Hey guys, my name is Greg DiPrisco. I'm the head of business development at MakerDAO. I'm the head of business development at the Maker Foundation, which creates the software that powers MakerDAO. Been told to say that. So I'm going to go over just a very basic overview of the DAI protocol and what we've been building at Maker. Since I believe I'm primarily talking to developers, I'm going to spare you the philosophical definitions of money and all that stuff, and just get right into the good stuff. So DAI is a decentralized stablecoin that lives on Ethereum. We say it's decentralized because the creation and redemption process, along with the transfer function, are not inhibited by any trusted intermediary. You create your own DAI, and you destroy your own DAI, and once you have DAI, you custody it entirely yourself. It's an asset-backed hard currency because it is backed by collateral. Much like Tether has dollars sitting in a bank account, allegedly, we have collateral sitting in our smart contracts provably. So you could always look at our balance sheet. It's one click away. There's no central point of failure. There's plenty of decentralized points of failure, but that's the best we can do. And it's programmable money. It's useful for a lot of different things, like collateralizing synthetic assets, which is something I think you'll see us do throughout the remainder of 2019 and into 2020. It's great as a quote currency on decentralized exchanges and for decentralized applications like Gnosis. You don't want to bet on Donald Trump winning in 2020 if you're betting in Ether, because you're going to lose either way. It's been live since December of 2017, which for most money is not that impressive, but that money was not backed by Ether during the greatest bear market in history. So right now we have about 83 million DAI in circulation. This is down from just shy of 100 million, and I thank all of you who closed your CDPs in the last 2 weeks. So what is the DAI credit system? Basically, it's a very simple construct at its core. You pledge a collateral asset, and against the value of this collateral asset, you are able to borrow DAI, or generate DAI more accurately. It's tempting to say borrow, but it's really more accurately generating, because Maker is somewhat like a decentralized central bank. And I know that sounds like an oxymoron, but it's true. If you think about it, central banks are the only entities that we currently have that can generate money against collateral. But much of the policies that we have from central banks have nothing to do with the underlying collateral. They're entirely based around the politics of the countries that they're servicing. Maker gives us a chance to get outside those politics, to remove those jurisdictions, and just give the world a better form of money that's only tied to the underlying collateral, and therefore be able to be generated at much lower rates than you would in the legacy economy. So just going to go over where we've been and where we're going. Since our inception, we've issued about 300 million DAI in aggregate. We have about 32,000 unique DAI holders that we've accumulated over time. And currently, there's about 2 million ETH, which is just about 2% of the Ethereum supply, locked in our smart contracts. That's nominally valued at about 340 million, probably a little higher today, fortunately. We had one collateral asset thus far, Ether. It dropped 94%. So I like to call this year our trial by fire because we made it. And the next version of the system is called multi-collateral. And this is where we diversify the collateral pool, give you better monetary policy and better mechanics to get stability at scale. Right now, our system is great for the tiny ecosystem that it exists in. But if we ever want to compete with real central banks, we need to offer a completely diversified and complex pool of collateral. So what do we have coming next? We have MCD, and MCD is going to have some really cool asset types that you're probably not thinking of. Most people think that Maker can only generate DAI against cryptocurrencies. This isn't true. Maker can create DAI against any asset that a bank can create money against. So I think you're going to see things like residential mortgages, invoices, all different sorts of stuff that you've really only interacted with the bank. Now you'll be able to interact with the DAI protocol when you want to create liquidity on an asset. Very exciting for DAI holders, we have the DAI savings rate coming out. This is going to be a smart contract that you can lock your DAI into and have DAI transferred to from the borrowers to yourselves. So basically, this functions as a savings rate on the DAI that you hold, and it helps us balance supply and demand. I don't know if you've seen, I'll get to the next slide, what's happened over the last year, but we've had to raise the stability fee quite a bit. This could be largely mitigated with the savings rate on DAI. And finally, we have synthetic assets coming on the market. These are really exciting. We actually have, there is one that's collateralized with DAI out there right now. It's called US Stocks Token, and it trades on DDEX. This is a token that tracks the price of the US stock market, and it effectively functions as a cash-settled derivative, but it's settled in DAI, and it's entirely decentralized. So nobody can prevent you from purchasing it or trading it, and it trades on DEXs, so really nobody can prevent you from trading it. We like to use a process in our system called scientific governance. This is how we get around the politics that normal central banks fall into. So every collateral that enters our system has to go through a very cumbersome open public process where it's scrutinized in front of the entire community of maker holders. The data sets are monitored, and basically all the parameters are issued around that open data. And more importantly, on top of that, there's no trust extended to our system. It's not like a traditional bank where you deposit assets and then everything goes behind a black box. Like I said earlier, our entire balance sheet is only one click away. You can always see the health of our system just by going to Etherscan. Oops, I went backwards. So what does this look like in practice? Well, over the last year, it's really chased the sentiment of the Ethereum market. So while Ether was in a very harsh bear market, we had to keep the stability fee down at 0.5% because we couldn't get enough people to generate DAI. This led to DAI trading at a premium on a lot of exchanges, which was good for DAI holders, but not really good for stability seekers, which is our main customer. So once the sentiment changed and everybody got instantly bullish on Ether, we've had to now raise the stability fee from 0.5% to 19.5%. And this much more accurately reflects the current demand for credit because we saw a pretty significant discount starting to happen in DAI and exchanges. But the good news is that it worked. And that's the really important part of all this, that our system worked, our open governance process worked, our scientific governance process worked, and we maintained the peg in DAI over all this volatility and changes in sentiment. So with that, I'm going to pass it off to my colleague Jen, who's going to talk a little bit more about our ecosystem.
Hey, everybody. Oh, is this on? Okay. Hey, everybody. So Greg talked a little bit about where we were and what we're looking at for the coming year. I just want to take a couple minutes to look at our ecosystem and the growth that's developing kind of underneath the products we've created, DAI, and our the DAI credit system. So this is a cool graph by Spencer Noon, which really illustrates the growth of third-party development that's taking place within the DAI ecosystem. And this is important because it's going to really help us as with our mission to become a fully decentralized organization. So we internally create a lot of tools. We have a great DAI JavaScript library that we make available to developers and other projects that want to take what we've built already and enhance that and create new user experiences and different access points to essentially what we're doing in the decentralized banking space. So this is an example from InstantApp, who created this different entry point to access our CDPs, which is our DAI credit system, which Greg talked a little bit about. Looking kind of at large, the different types of area that we're seeing growth, it's really about people like InstantApp building upon our CDP management, people creating really cool analytics tools. Things like Maker Tools gives really amazing visualizations of analytics about DAI, CDPs, and everything that's taking place in real time. Certainly there's a lot of things in payments, exchanges, and wallets, and it's just it's been really great to kind of see this blossom over the last year. So beyond the most obvious use cases for just crypto in general, which is heavily about trading and speculation, the past year we've really kind of seen and proven out the value in using DAI as a global, stable medium of exchange, and particularly looking at areas like remittance, where now through different partners where we can provide fiat on-ramps to DAI, and then having the ability for people to exchange that within their local currencies, and in improving upon existing systems where it's very costly to move money and dealing with exchange fees. So That's been exciting to see being proven out this year. Another area has been in the nonprofit social impact space. We're partnering with organizations like UNICEF, the Lupus Foundation, and many others that are really starting to look at using a stable currency like DAI as an additional way to fundraise, but also to have a more transparent way of recording where donations are going and how they're being sent. And everybody's been talking about DeFi. It's a huge trend right now, and DAI has been really kind of the premier stable coin as a decentralized stable coin. We've been really the backbone of kind of bringing a lot of these DeFi projects to life. So it's exciting to see that, and also for people that hold DAI, this is really great because there's now so many different ways you can use DAI and do a lot of really interesting things, whether it's through prediction markets, lending and borrowing platforms like Compound and DYDX, or through UMA having exposure to U.S. stocks, even if you're not based in the U.S. So we've been just growing. So in the past year, really over the past few years, we are now at 165 live integrations. We have tons in the pipeline, and we're continually talking to people and looking at widening this ecosystem. So it's been just a fantastic year in terms of growth. If you want to find us, here are the many ways. And of course, you can reach out to Greg and I on the BizDev team and come up to us. We have tons of people at Maker here at the event, so you'll probably bump into somebody without even trying. Thank you.
All right, thanks guys. That was really insightful. So I just have a couple of questions, and then it looks like a lot of people showed up for this talk, so we probably have some questions in the audience. My first question really is, you mentioned multi-collateral DAI. How do you choose the asset types? Who actually chooses which assets will be used in the system? And B, when's it coming? When are we going to see multi-collateral DAI?
I'm going to plead the fifth on the second one there, but hopefully soon, even though I think the EF trademarked that. As to who chooses assets in multi-collateral DAI, it's the maker holders. So there's this governance token baked into our system, and this governance token not only picks the parameters by which assets can generate DAI, they pick the assets themselves, and they underwrite every DAI generation event. So if you think about the way this process might look in real life, let's say they want to insert wrapped Bitcoin into our system. You're going to put that in front of the maker holders, and the maker holders have to then discuss it through our scientific governance process, and then they have to assign 3 main parameters to this asset. They need to assign a stability fee, which is the rate that they're going to charge for taking on all that risk. They're going to assign the debt ceiling, which is the amount of DAI in aggregate that can be borrowed against this asset, and finally the collateralization ratio. And in multi-collateral, you may see the same asset have multiple collateralization ratios at different stability fees, because all that you're doing when you decrease the collateralization ratio is increasing the risk of the DAI generation, which then means that just needs to be compensated with a higher interest rate or stability fee. But I guess it's important to note that where this stability fee goes, yes, it goes to the maker holders in return for governing the system, but it also goes to them because they're underwriting the entire system. If there's ever a situation, which fortunately we haven't seen yet, where there's less DAI, there's less collateral in the smart contracts than there is DAI outstanding, then that's an under-collateralization event, and the maker holders are diluted in order to make up that shortfall. So they are taking a significant amount of risk by governing the protocol.
Can you go into that a little bit more? Like, what would happen in that case?
Well, so let's say that you have a CDP open, and it's collateralized with $150 of Ether, and you borrow 100 DAI. And then there's some cataclysmic event that brings Ether down to $75 in that moment. Now you have $75 of collateral backing 100 DAI outstanding. And the system doesn't work, because the whole premise is that there's always more than $1 of collateral for every 1 DAI outstanding. So in that situation, the maker holders would be diluted until that 25 DAI is made up.
And just, my second question was just in terms of risk management. You said, 2 million ETH or whatever is locked up right now in CDPs. Is there a cap on how much ETH can be locked up in CDPs, or a cap on what can be locked up in multi-collateral DAI?
There's no cap on how much can be locked in the contracts. There's a cap on how much DAI can be generated against it.
Okay, and what's that? Is that a set number, or is that something that's decided based on the
Currently,
collateral?
it's 100 million, but that's going to go away with multi-collateral. That's more of a technical constraint because the following iteration of the software is going to be completely formally verified. While this version has been heavily audited, it's not formally verified. So we put that in just to limit the extent of potential losses through a hack.
All right. Any questions out there in the audience? I'm going to walk around with the mic just so we can hear everybody.
So a great presentation. Now, when can we really see someone using DAI to buy a coffee or pay for lunch or something like that?
It depends.
So far,
It depends where you're asking about. In the US, I think it's going to take a while. Credit cards are really good, and we get a lot of points for using them. But somewhere like Argentina, I know we have some of our Argentinian teammates here, I think they use DAI today. So.
I mean, technically, you could buy DAI last night. You could buy beer last night using DAI at our happy hour. But yeah, it's still a little bit further off. But places like Latin America, this is much more of a daily, kind of part of their life.
Yeah, generally the logic of that equation flows from why am I holding DAI in the first place to why am I using DAI? Not the other way around. You don't hold DAI because you can use it places. You use DAI because you're holding it already. And in the States, that probably won't make sense until we have the DSR.
I have two questions. The first, is this considered a derivative in the US markets from CFTC or SEC perspectives?
I pass all legal questions on to the lawyers.
Okay. What's the standard deviation of DAI over the last 3 months, 6 months, relative to US dollar or treasury?
You mean the variance?
Standard deviation. Variance is good enough.
I don't know the specific number. I can tell you the highs and lows. So I know that on the low end, it hit 96 cents during the peak of the supply glut. And on the upside, I think it popped to like 104 momentarily, but probably it spent the majority of its time between 98 cents and $1.02. Obviously, the system needs to get this down, but I think that's something that'll happen with multi-collateral and the DSR.
See, that's why I asked standard deviation, because the high and low doesn't convey much information. Mm-hmm. If it hits between 98 and 101 15 times per day, then you have a significant risk versus high one day, low one day over 365-day year. So long story short, is it truly stable relative to its target, which would be a US dollar or whatever the target may be?
It's truly stable based on your acceptable standard deviation.
Based upon my acceptable standard
Well, yeah, because
deviation?
it's different. It's a different function for every person. Maybe some people find it trading anywhere between 98 cents and $1.02 perfectly acceptable, and other people need it to be $1 all the time. So it's really a matter of what you're using it for and where you need that to be.
What was the actual goal from the developer's perspective?
I don't know.
Are you guys working with any point-of-sale device providers to get DAI or DAI payments integrated into just the device itself?
We are. You want to take this one?
Yeah, so we're working with a handful of kind of merchant solutions that are incorporating DAI into their digital support. So yeah, we do have a few.
There's a couple we can't announce yet, but I think the two that are public are in Latin America right now. We have, I know Panda X, right? I think that's in Colombia and Venezuela.
And actually, Bloomy Pay, right? Thomas right here, he just recently created a point of sale support where you can use merchants could use this on their web applications to accept DAI and some other cryptocurrencies.
So a big thing in DeFi is that all the apps are interoperable, right? So you can use DAI and put it into Compound or Celsius and so on and so forth. So that works very well when Ethereum is going up or the collateral is going up. But when in a scenario like what we saw in 2018, when things are going down, it creates a domino effect, right? And creates a systemic risk across the board. Have you guys done any modeling or stress tests, what happens in that case, and measures to address those issues?
I'm not sure I followed the domino effect you're referencing.
So ether price goes down, CDPs get liquidated, and the same effect happens across all other assets, so on Compound or Dharma. Things when collateral falls in value, those contracts get liquidated. So there's a domino effect. So the situation
Okay, so
worsens,
you're saying
becomes
like
more worse than it
a
actually is.
cascade effect on the price because you're going to just keep tapping that
Yeah.
same liquidity. Yeah, I don't think we've modeled it, mainly because we know that it's unsustainable. Like we need multi-collateral DAI or the system doesn't scale. It doesn't scale with one collateral type, partially because of that and partially because of a whole host of reasons where having one collateral type backing one fungible token is not sustainable over the long run.
All right, any more questions? All right. I'm having fun running around.
You're making exercise. Hi. You guys talked a few times about Latin America, and I know that you're making right now an alliance for Venezuela with ARTM. It just rang my bell when you said that you were working also with the UNICEF. So you are getting advice, right, of how to help people in Latin America, I guess. What are exactly your expectations with giving $10 to each user of AirTM?
Yeah, well, I mean, we hope, A, that AirTM solves the problem of custody for them, where traditionally if somebody gives a Venezuelan cryptocurrency, they don't have a great way of transmitting it from point A to point B. If everybody's in the AirTM ecosystem, then it's very easy for them to do that. The second thing is that we hope that DAI succeeds where all the other cryptos have failed, because a lot of times it just doesn't make sense to pay in Bitcoin. That's why we had to invent DAI in the first place. So we're hoping that we see a genuine economy develop around these distributions.
So far you think that in Venezuela you have a strong DAI ecosystem for being used, or you have a community of DAI users, or?
Oh no, this is brand new. I mean, we just did that thing with AirTM last week.
Why Venezuela?
Probably because it is the most obvious pain point right now, but truthfully, we haven't targeted Venezuela. We've mainly targeted Argentina. That's where most of our business development efforts go.
All right. I think we have about time for a few more after this, so make sure you raise your hand if you have a question.
This is more a follow-up to the variance question, standard deviation. If you compare DAI to Tether, I can say you're significantly more stable than Tether, which is kind of the one that's most commonly used for stable coins. So your stability is about half, meaning it's more stable by 50% over Tether, for the data I have on my website.
Thank you.
Following on that, I actually have a question. What would be the main advantage of using DAI over like a collateralized stablecoin, like Gemini or Tether or something like that?
Well, this goes back to the basic premise that you need a decentralized stablecoin. Those stablecoins are great, but they're not decentralized. So if you don't have any problem with using banks as your endpoint, then I guess you have to ask the question of why we're doing this whole cryptocurrency thing in the first place. But we think that there is utility for a decentralized stablecoin where you are the custodian of your own assets, and you're not trusting any intermediary, and nobody can freeze your funds no matter what they want to do. Yeah, actually, that's a really great point, that some of the first collateral types we're most likely going to have in multi-collateral are other stablecoins. And this is for a reason that's maybe not intuitive, but our market makers that need to create DAI when it's trading at a premium don't want to lock up volatile assets. That generally compounds the problem that they have. So they want to lock up a non-directional asset like another stablecoin that they can get a really low collateralization ratio on, and thus very high leverage, so that they can create a lot of DAI with a very small deposit of someone else's stablecoin. And the whole point is that there's no problem with these trusted stablecoins, as long as, from our perspective, they don't represent the entire pool of collateral. They'll represent a relatively small portion of the pool of collateral and increase the overall stability of DAI because of their low volatility.
So my question, I think, is for Ms. Senhaji. On the group of partners you showed, there were some non-profit-y sort of things like UNICEF, Lupus Foundation. I think we saw Needs List, maybe some others. Especially curious about UNICEF, but could you tell us what kind of partnerships you have with it and other similar entities?
Yeah, sure. So with UNICEF in particular, they're looking to have DAI, well, they've already incorporated this, but they're using DAI as a way to create bounties for different types of projects. So for example, they have something coming up this fall where they're going to be helping schools that have low connectivity. And so they're basically using DAI as the currency to kind of fundraise for these specific projects. And they're going to be doing this on the blockchain to provide a different level of transparency and record keeping for that. We recently partnered with the Lupus Foundation. They're looking at ways to just kind of widen their audience of people, of fundraisers, and also just looking at, again, this transparent way to kind of reduce overhead costs and just provide a more, a quicker transaction mode than particularly cross borders.
Did you say audits? Lupus Foundation was interested in audits?
No, I didn't say audits.
I didn't misunderstand.
They're looking for an audience, for a wider audience. Oh, okay. Yeah, so looking for a wider audience, of people that are interested in donating. So tapping into the crypto community, and then just kind of helping to educate their audience on different technologies to, evolve into for fundraising.
So is the Lupus Foundation accepting donations in DAI?
They are, yeah. You could go to their website right now. Mm-hmm.
All right, well, it looks like we're actually out of time on this panel. Wish we had more, but you can find anyone from the Maker team around. I'm sure they're happy to answer your questions. Thanks, guys.